the speed at which you can find things is driven solely off the fact that you have an appropriately defined process. And if your process is appropriately defined, again, you can find things quickly, but it isn't just that you can find them, it's that you can appropriately deal with them when they are sitting in front of you and you have all your work instructions. That's the important part.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Most machine shops are afraid of going for certifications such as AS9100 and CMMC due to the process overheads and compliance requirements imposed. They would rather invest that money in buying more machines and adding more people. While these certifications can be perceived as unnecessary, they can open up tons of newer opportunities for you. They can also make you efficient with your operations and provide the necessary controls for creating a sustainable business that might have much higher value when you're ready to sell. In today's episode, we have our guest, Aaron Theisen, who shares his journey to AS certification for his shop. He also discusses how AS9100 certification can open up newer opportunities for your shop and grow faster despite it being perceived to be expensive. Finally, he shares several data and reporting requirements that you need to get in a row before you attempt to acquire the certification. Let me introduce Aaron to you. Aaron is one of the principal owners of TNT Aerospace that manufactures parts and assemblies for some of the largest aerospace and defense customers in the world. In 2020, Aaron led the effort at TNT to become AS9100 RevD certified and is in the process of acquiring CMMC certification. In addition, Aaron is a tireless advocate for the aerospace manufacturing sector, taking part in several advocacy organizations, industry events, and making every effort to improve the overall supply chain cluster here in the Pacific Northwest. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hi Sam, great to see you here.
Okay, amazing. And finally, we are able to do this after all those technical problems. So I am super excited to dig into your background and what we have to talk today. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus, Aaron?
Sure. I'm one of the principal owners of TNT Aerospace. We started our business in 2006.
Yeah.
And in 2021, just recently, we received our AS9100 certification that we had been working on ever so diligently for an extended period of time. And we basically work within the aerospace and defense space.
Yeah.
And we are now moving forward with our next initiative, which is working toward our CMMC certification for Department of Defense applications.
Amazing. So it must be a fun journey for you going through AS and all of a sudden you want to move to CMMC. That's like, doing 2 marathons in a row. Good for you.
Yeah. That was a double whammy. I mean, it's one of those ones where it's basically the same skill set that you're utilizing with your AS9100 versus your CMMC. And so it worked out very well because I'm in the same headspace that I was within my AS9100. So it worked really, really well.
So I was actually talking to one of the guys, who does a lot of CMMC work with a lot of different manufacturers. And he was talking about how grueling the process is going to be for CMMC. So once he actually acquired that, we are going to have this conversation again, whether AS was more fun or CMMC was more fun. Okay, Aaron. So, before we dig into that, we have one of these standard questions, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth, Aaron.
My perspective on business growth is kind of coming from a unique perspective insofar that we are a rather small company, but we chose to grow slowly and appropriately for the number of people that we had available to us. We were a very small family business, but we always had aspirations of growing larger into a larger space. And I think that it was really important to understand that with the small size also comes with appropriately sized growth. You can outpace your funding very quickly with kind of an overindulgence on systems and certain things that you probably shouldn't be spending money on. And I think that we really realized that if you really kind of throw everything in the wall all at once and don't manage that up front, it becomes very difficult to have your operating capital and everything together all at once when you really need it. So my perspective kind of comes from appropriate growth for the size and funding that you require, that you have.
Yeah, I agree. And anybody who is probably managing the budget and probably a business owner, they are going to be slightly conservative. They are going to take managed growth approach. They are going to take very incremental approach. So I completely agree with you that, this is what everybody should be thinking. They should not be running after every shiny object out there and then run out of the cash, which is a common
shiny objects.
Exactly. Okay, so let's go back to your AS9100 journey. Tell us, what was the core driver? I know that you have been working on this for a long time. When you started, did you already know what you were going to do? How long was the process? When you started this journey, what all you had to do to make sure that the journey is going to be smooth?
We were fortunate when we decided to start this business. We started with an AS9100 geared system. We've always been AS9100 compliant, if not certified. So based on that, it was actually a really easy situation in order to, we're essentially collecting data for roughly a year prior to our certification. And that data was already previously existing. So the good news is that I didn't have to create systems in order to support those requirements within the standard. So I think that the company culture as it stood when we started the business at all, I think that was the best thing that we could have done for ourselves as far as preparing for the future. And based on that, we started in 2006. We've always done aerospace work. We definitely needed to get our AS certification because of just changes in the market. We couldn't continue to compete and continue to add customers if we did not have an AS certification. So good news is that we already had an AS certified or AS compliant system. So we just followed along, grabbed the information out of the system, and essentially within a year's worth of information and my attention to the system, essentially we were ready to go. We didn't have to do a lot of new stuff. It was just keep doing the stuff that you're doing and make sure it's documented. That's all it took.
Interesting. So there's a lot of great insights there, and I want to make sure that we are able to touch on all of that, right? But you made one of the comments, and that was initially you were doing some sort of, aerospace compliant work, but then you ran into a situation where the customers were actually asking the AS. So my understanding of the aerospace ecosystem is going to be, if you want to serve any of the aerospace customers, then you probably need to have AS. So in some cases, did you find out that some customers were not really requiring the AS and you could still serve them without actually having the certification? So what was that finding like that, today I need AS, because now I'm not able to add the customers. Were you adding more of the larger customers, or what's going on here? Can you describe a little bit more there?
Yeah. I think that essentially what had happened is that we had kind of stepped outside of where we were originally on the supply chain and when we first started, because we were doing subcontract work, which unfortunately in this business doesn't necessarily provide a ton of growth depending upon the sizes of businesses that you're working with.
Yeah.
So because that's technically someone else's work that you're taking, and trying to complete it for them.
Okay.
So based on that, we realized at some point that in order to support the things that we really wanted to do here, we needed to be higher on the food chain as far as like where we got our supply of work from.
Yeah.
So that being the case, we did find people originally that didn't require AS certifications, and we were able to save that money and put it into machines and people and things of that nature. Fast forward to just the last year, the reality is that those requirements have become more stringent. The commercial aerospace industry was basically on the skids, and we needed to do something different than what we had been doing in order to attract customers. And realistically, the only way to do that is to increase your overall profile. And in response to that thought process, I said, well, it's credentials, and AS9100 was a credential that we required in order to be able to do that.
Very interesting. So since you mentioned the requirements are becoming more stringent, so have you seen this personally? Who's driving these requirements right now? Because I know from my experience as well, when it comes to your compliance and processes, I mean, they sort of evolve, right? Once let's say the OEMs find out that there is a gap in the process, so they are obviously going to be slightly more stricter, right? So did you notice this change overall in the industry? Do other machine shop owners need to know about these changes in the requirement? And the vendors that were able to provide the work for you earlier, are they not in a position to provide work anymore? Do they need to provide the AS certification, or do they need to hire the vendors that are going to be AS certified? Otherwise, their contracts are going to be killed. So can you touch a little bit more there? What's going on overall in the industry from the evolution perspective?
Sure. I think that I'll be honest with you. I think that the industry, it didn't necessarily change from our perspective. I think that it was more to do with the fact that we changed.
Okay.
We're trying to climb, the food chain. I mean, for lack of a better term. And that being the case, as you start kind of finding that, you're moving outside of subcontract work and doing more direct work for like tier ones and primes, you start to realize very quickly that the door closer conversation for you before we even get involved with those folks is, hey, where's your AS certification at? And so knowing where we wanted to head as far as a business work was concerned, and having kind of a more solid, stable foundation to stand upon, I think that was what the driver was to get us to AS9100. I don't think that the overall market ever changed. I think that we managed to find niches within our area of influence locally, and we were able to get through for an extended period of time based on that. And we just had to change that thought process. That's just what had to happen, because the industry requires these things now.
Yeah, exactly. And my understanding, I mean, I have spoken to a lot of different, the tier ones, the OEMs, and their understanding, the way they structure the supply quality process, they are going to say, you know what, if you want to serve the aerospace, then anytime you are going to sign a supplier, you need to make sure as tier 2, tier 3, that if you are subcontracting that process, the supplier underneath is going to be AS compliant as well. And if you are going to subcontract any of that work, then they are supposed to reporting it to their whoever is higher in the food chain, as you mentioned, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. That's important. You have to have an entire supply chain that is AS certified when it comes right down to it, and that's again part of your AS certification, to maintain that AS approved supplier list, so that they do support your customers' requirements in that regard.
Yeah, so what's going on here? I mean, see, let's say if you could find some of the customers who were actually giving you work, were they not really reporting it to their OEM? Were they treating you as part of their team, or how are they managing that process contractually?
They managed it turned out that they managed the subcontract to us by essentially providing the OEM with our original paperwork. And from what I understand, they were able to get us approved to supply them parts for program X, Y, or Z based on what we had provided them in the past and things of that nature. But that was the only way that we were able to do those sorts of things. And again, that's all on subcontract. So that's, like I said, it's somebody else's work. Right. And that's sort of where the rubber hits the road. If you're doing someone else's work, that work can go away very quickly.
Exactly. And there is a clear risk overall operationally, to be honest, if you really think about it, right? Because, the OEMs and tier ones are really mandating. I mean, they really care for this one because at the end of the day, see, these parts are really critical, and the supplier processes that are designed, or the quality process, or for that matter, AS9100 exists there for a reason.
Yes, exactly. They want that document package to look the same every time. And that's it. The consistency has to be there.
Exactly. So let's go about the requirements. So you mentioned that since 2006, obviously you guys were sort of ahead in the curve, even though you were not certified on paper, but you wanted to make sure that you are really complying and you're collecting all of that data that is going to be required to meet the AS guidelines. So can you talk about, number one, what are different requirements in terms of the data collection that you need to know? And let's say if manufacturer or the machine shop that is not collecting the data at that point of time, obviously their certification process is going to be delayed because they'll not be able to justify their capabilities to be able to produce AS parts. So what kind of data elements are we talking about here, and what requirements are we talking about here?
The main thing with anything as far as requirements for documentation, traceability thing, it's all traceability. Everything has to be able to be traced back to where it came from. And that's sort of where the rubber hits the road on that front. Your docs all have to be in order. They have to line up with all of the drawing requirements, and there can't be any daylight between any one individual specification. And I think that's essentially what the biggest difference is between AS work and a lot of other work is that traceability, having the ability to understand like where that material came from the ground. I mean, what country it came from, all of the federal acquisition requirements, things of that nature. Those are the important things with all of those document packaging for aerospace customers.
Yeah, so traceability, obviously, that's a big word, right? And let's say if somebody has never traced anything in their machine shop, everything is probably traced on paper, and then for them, they are going to say, you know what, the system needs to be traceable. So as you know, Aaron, we are in the ERP space. Yes. And, when we get these requirements, hey, the system needs to be traceable. This is how the requirement is. And that's going to be a big bullet point. And then we are going to say, okay, so tell us which specific data elements, which specific product, which specific vendor, which site, which warehouse, which vendor are we trying to put?
What time? What date?
Right?
Yes, all important.
So tell us a little bit more. Maybe, tell us a story where, let's say, when you evolved, I can almost guarantee this, Aaron. I mean, you are not tracking everything from day one. There must be some slip-offs. So tell us some stories about, let's say, when you were in 2006, what all were you tracking when you went to, let's say, 2008, 2010? What all pieces were missed there? And then what you did to track those as well?
Essentially, in 2006, we were doing work for what was at the time our current employer. We did not just step off and just run this business and hopefully we could, pay our bills with the business as it was. We worked for another machine shop for an extended period of time for roughly 2 years before we got our feet off the ground. So essentially, like at that time, we were tasked with simply just dimensional requirements, having the ability to list all of it, first article inspection reports, and essentially that was where we started. We didn't have a lot of traceability requirements because, again, we were doing subcontract work. The other people, the customer was actually purchasing the material, so it was comparatively simplistic. You're running into 2010, 2011 at some point, and that was when we had to start really kind of changing around our documentation, having purchasing material more, sending things to outside processing, for coatings and things of that nature that were required for all these aerospace applications that required like AS certifications for their processes as well as NADCAP certifications.
Yeah.
It was about that time where we had to really start paying attention to your material certifications and all of those the documentation associated with any outside processing. And those reports just got a lot bigger. That's just how, they just grew. It was a question of like just getting everything down on an AS9100 form, which we learned about eventually. And that's basically the way that we have ran it since. It's just issue purchase orders, issue work orders. Where did this come from? Where did that come from? Here's your certifications, compile everything with some good parts and send it off to your customer. That was really all it needed to be.
Yeah. So let's say if somebody has never looked at, let's say, the AS9100 reports, and they are trying to find out, okay, how the reports really grew. Okay, what kind of data elements are we talking about here, right? Because see, if you look at me, I'm just a machine shop owner here. I don't know what happens in aerospace. I don't know what kind of data elements you're looking at. So give us some perspective of, let's say, if I'm looking at that report for the first time, what kind of data elements are we looking at there? I know that you touched at a very high level, but let's say if I'm trying to get into the aerospace, I need to know what all data I need to collect, because I need to change my processes. I need to make sure my people understand those data elements so that they are able to capture inside the reports, right? So give us some more perspective there.
So what you're kind of referring to is like the data requirements for the processes, I think, is probably where you're heading on that front, because we're a very process-driven industry and business here. I think that in order to kind of solidify all of those processes, that's sort of where the training aspect of AS9100 kind of comes into play. And I think that a lot of people don't give this enough credit, but you have to have competent personnel. That's actually part of your standard as well. It's very important that your personnel are competent. And the only way that you can make those personnel competent is actually train them on their actual jobs, and then dovetail that with whatever requirements you have with your customer. That training was actually kind of like what the continuous training is, the thing that keeps us. That kind of kept us on track. It was always a question of like, what's the new thing that we need to know today? Well, reality is that we don't necessarily need to know anything new, but having training will connect all of the dots between one portion of the system, like for example, like a purchasing portion of your system, or procurement, and your shop floor management and scheduling and things of that nature. It was just connecting the dots within the training, and I'll be honest with you, the training is probably the thing that helped us out the most. We all knew what we were doing. It's a matter of connecting the dots within your own system.
Okay, so let's say, Aaron, I know for a fact that, let's say, if you talk to a person who is not going to be as well trained versus a person who is going to be competent, and now you can probably spot them by their shadow.
Yes, you're not wrong.
Right. So tell us, okay, so what are these guys being trained on? I mean, what are the specifics here? Let's say if you are able to spot that, but describe the thought process in terms of how you are identifying them. What are the things the trained person or the competent person is going to have that the other person is not going to have? And these guys are going to be extremely specific the way they talk. Okay, so when you look at the competent person versus not trained for AS, how is the expertise going to differ between these two people?
I feel as though like competent folks within an AS system are kind of have like a holistic understanding of the entire process and system from end to end. I think that a lot of instances, like throughout our lives, especially within our lives of employment, oftentimes we wind up going through the motions just as your general, as a general rule. You work at for example, like a retail establishment or things of that nature. You show up to work, you put some stuff away, you do this, that, and the other thing, and then you go home, and that's the end of it. In aerospace, it isn't quite like that. It's very, you always have this responsibility as an aerospace manufacturing employee to be honest and to have integrity and to report things correctly. I think that the level of integrity that it is required and incumbent upon us here in the aerospace industry versus other industries is really the thing that sets us apart, because I mean, the reality is that people can be falsifying reports. People could send out bad parts and just not care, right? They could just write in a number and say, yeah, they'll figure it out, whatever. It doesn't work that way within this industry. And having people have that level of understanding and that level of integrity, those are the people that I want. Those are the people that I recognize as people that can help us. And I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but the level of integrity in this system is really like it's paramount at the end of the day.
Yeah. So let's say if I'm walking to a shop that is going to be AS certified, and you know that, Aaron, as we agreed, that the people who are going to be working there, we can identify them by their shadow, that these guys are really trained. Now, let's say if I'm going to a shop, okay, and that shop is not necessarily AS compliant or AS trained or AS certified. By looking at it, you can tell that these guys don't know what they are doing, is how I like to define. Because what AS does is it basically provides a sense of structure to your processes, the way the manufacturing is supposed to be done, to be honest. Right? Now, when you are walking to many different shops, so do you have any specific stories that you might be able to share that when you walked in that shop, you could tell that this is not really the AS compliant or AS certified?
I think that the AS compliant, AS certified shops, and this has been my experience throughout my life thus far in this business, you can always tell when you walk through the door and you realize that you can't read just your average sheet of paper like sitting in front of you, like it's very dimly lit. Things look dirty, things look out of place. Because since given the fact that the aerospace industry is so process driven, and the reality is that so is the standard is very process driven as well, as far as AS9100 is concerned. The whole process is going to be predicated upon whether or not you can find things quickly, whether you can assess things quickly. That's always where the starting point is. And oftentimes, if you can't find, just like, for example, like if your tooling library is like a mess and you can't find things and it's not archived correctly, that's an indicator. You can't have an aerospace driven system without having traceable tooling, traceable every aspect of a particular part number being able to be tracked down and assessed for accuracy or integrity. And I think that, if you've got just stuff laying around out in the middle of the shop, which I have seen, unfortunately, those sorts of things are an indicator. Cleanliness will make all of the difference in this instance. It's just it's a five. I don't know how familiar with 5S you are. 5S is sort of like kind of where you can really find the low hanging fruit. They're easy things to change. You don't have to develop a bunch of processes to be clean and orderly, So I think that's probably, I would go out on a limb and say that that's probably the most important thing that I would notice immediately.
Okay, interesting. So when you say, so I'm actually touching back on your comment, right? And that's very interesting comment and very interesting story related to tooling, that if you are not able to find these things quickly, obviously you can tell that they are probably not in their game with respect to their AS readiness, is what I like to define, right? So let's say if they are not able to find quickly, are they going to be penalized by, let's say, the auditor? If they are not able to find quickly, is there a requirement for the speed of information is how I am interpreting this comment, right? That, and I have heard this in the other industries as well. For example, let's say if you talk about if you're selling to medical device, then they actually judge your your readiness based on the speed of response. And the speed of response is going to be, hey, you know what? I asked you a question and I expect that you respond within 4 hours. If you are not able to respond within 4 hours, either you are trying to create the data, either you are trying to create the report, you don't really have that report ready in your system where you can simply look up based on your part number, and you are trying to identify, okay, or you are trying to debug what exactly happened with that part. Where exactly did it came from? Do you have a screenshot of your system that you can probably attach in the email? And if you are not able to do that, then most likely they are not going to trust you that you are FDA compliant. So in this specific case, when you had this experience with, let's say, the auditors, or when you were submitting the documentation, the speed with which you could actually submit the information, is that critical during the documentation or the certification phase?
I would say that I would say yes. The answer is basically yes, but I think that speed is a side effect of having a well-defined process.
Okay.
It's a symptom. Basically, I would say that the speed at which you can find things is driven solely off the fact that you have an appropriately defined process. And if your process is appropriately defined, again, you can find things quickly, but it isn't just that you can find them. It's that you can appropriately deal with them when they are sitting in front of you and you have all of your work instructions. That's the important part, right? That's where the process-driven aspect of the entire AS9100 system really comes into play. And again, like I said, speed is just kind of like a symptom. If you can find this fast, that means that this is probably working. If this takes you an hour to find it, your system isn't as robust as what it needs to be in order to be able to support what we're really looking for. It's just a canary in the coal mine, honestly.
Yeah, and so when you talk about these, processes, and you know that when you are looking at really well-defined process, you can sort of sense the quality there. So let's say, and I don't know if you had to change anything. You mentioned that you were always compliant, since 2006. I don't know if because of the certification you had to tighten the belt a bit. So can you provide an example of let's say, not as well-defined process versus the well-defined process, and what are the differences there? Can you provide an example?
Let's see. I actually had, I think some of the things that even the auditor had found, I had a couple of NCRs. I had 4 total. And those were pretty simplistic to figure out. But as far as being able to like what I had to change, or like things that I had to kind of deal with that weren't quite sufficiently dealt with. There was just a lot of it was question of KPI. So our performance indicators are kind of like they were on reports. We sort of knew what we needed to be seeing, but we didn't have like specifically like lined out, here's your KPI for this has to be within here, between here and here in order to be able to be acceptable. We didn't have that as well defined as what was necessary. So realistically, that was actually something that I had to kind of come up with outside of what we were already using, like our KPIs for like on-time delivery, quality, things of that nature. Those are all kind of pretty boilerplate types of things, but there's other things like within, being able to measure a process, like your purchasing process, shipping process, things of that nature, that I needed to kind of solidify as far as like what we were going to choose to measure. And basically those were the things that I really needed to change as far as like just having the ability to assess individual aspects of our processes and be able to kind of give them a label, give them a number, something that says like pass or fail. And those were the things that I think that were probably the biggest items that I needed to take care of when I finally got to it. And the good news is that I had all of that information there for me to look at and say, well, I like this KPI over here, but this one is better, based on the information that I've collected. And it was really nice insofar that I had all of the information there. It was just a question of like, hey, what do I like as far as like how am I going to be able to tell that something's going haywire or anything like that? And that was really nice to have those options placed in front of me that were already previously existing. I didn't have to come up with anything; it was just already there.
Interesting. So that's a very interesting comment there related to process and, things, the KPIs that you mentioned, such as, let's say, if you talk about on-time delivery, that's just easy because everybody sort of understand that's relatable. But when you talk about KPIs related to process, and I don't know if you have any example of those KPIs related to process as well. Are they looking at, how many times is the process followed? What were the deviations? What are the number of deviations? Are they looking at that? Is there a name for that KPI related to that process compliance, non-compliance?
So basically, like for example, like a KPI that I came up with, and this was actually a really easy way of going about assessing whether or not I was doing things in purchasing correctly. But sometimes you gotta pick something easy. And the easy thing for me in purchasing, just for this example, was are you charging the proper price for your items that are going into your assembly or your part?
Yeah.
And so it turned out that we were able to go back and say, hey, we got charged this much for this, we got charged this much for this, got charged this much for this, and then going through things and realizing where we were as far as are you on the red side of the ledger or are you on the black side of the ledger with all of your purchasing activities? And of course, we have we have numbers that we have to hit as far as being on the plus side of things. And it was a really easy way of going about it. Just list the number of POs, look at the total at the very bottom, and see where you're at. Do you have the amount of what you charge the customer? Was that appropriate for the project? And then you could go back up the list and pick out individual things that didn't work out so well. Fortunately, we had a very, 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 very small number of those. And it was just an easy way of going about that particular one. But that was one of the things that I had to do.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So, okay, so let me make sure that I understand this and listeners are able to follow this one as well. So let's say if I have some sort of, bill of material that I am working on from the customer, and my understanding based on what you described is that I should be charging the fair price to the customer. Now, how are they defining this price as being fair? Are they looking at each of the components? They are looking at your internal cost. What was that cost? Because, my understanding of the manufacturing and the companies that are going to be, let's say, even if they are doing aerospace, they are not going to be as great as at costing their own components. So if they are not going to be as great at that, how do you define the pricing? Because the pricing is going to be very subjective as well. It's just some random number, right? So how do they define it being fair, and what do they accept it as being fair?
Essentially, the process for estimating and things of that nature oftentimes drives those sorts of, because the estimating process obviously comes prior to cutting of any chips or anything of that nature. And I think that is essentially where those sorts of things have to line up. You always have to, your estimate is got to line up with what you physically charge the customer at the end of the day at their through the customer purchase order. And I think that was, having the ability to kind of look at things and say, all right, these people, these are their minimum lot charges over here, or do we have those minimum lot charges saved? Do we have them appropriately defined in our system for that particular supplier? Things of that nature. Just as far as having all of those costs be what we expected them to be in the initial phases of the project. And that's the thing is that after you quoted 3 months ago, and if you missed something, you can't exactly go back to your customer and say, I got to charge you another $500 a part for that in order to make my numbers. Well, unfortunately, your numbers have already been sent in, and they have expectations. So that's important.
So what do they say? Let's say if you have this situation, and this is probably going to be a situation all the time. So what is their guidelines to handle these deviations? And I don't know how many shops are going to have their estimation system connected with the operational system and then the financial system, because everything needs to be connected, right? In majority of the cases, all of these systems are really siloed. So you don't really have a centralized insight that you can utilize to be able to furnish these reports. Otherwise, you are actually going to be spending a lot of time in collecting data, and the only thing you are doing is really producing these reports.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Our system that we just changed ERP systems as I think it was 3 weeks ago now. We actually changed ERP systems, and those systems are completely integrated. So that was sort of like one of those things that was important to us, to have the ability to assess those, all of those things all at once. I think that having those systems integrated, it makes it a lot faster process and a lot more obvious process from our perspective, because we can just go back through and just look at the history on stuff. Everything from your outside processing, whatever your machining took, material, this, that, and the other thing. It's all associated with one number and one file for that particular part. And, history is there. You can assess it however you like, as long as you've got the numbers for, what it cost you and all that went into it. You should be able to go through it with our system as it stands right now, be able to figure out whether you're in the red or in the black. Very few times are we ever in the red. So that's the good news.
Interesting. So when they look at this fairness in terms of what you are charging to your customers, are they also looking at the entire distribution in terms of which supplier you are working with and how much you are basically, they are charging you to define the cost, and then what you are charging for the labor? Are they looking at the entire distribution, or are they simply looking at, okay, this was your estimated amount, and this is your actual amount that you charge to the customer, and maybe you had a little bit of deviation? As long as you have the explanation for the deviation, are they going to be okay? Or are they looking at the entire supply chain that, you should be telling me that, this is the part that you got from this specific supplier. You bought it for, let's say, I don't know, maybe $20. And then you put your labor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are instances like, it depends on the project, right? I mean, if somebody's just asking us for, here's your part, the only thing that goes into this is, your material, you're going to machine this, and you're going to stick a thread insert into it, and then you're going to send it to us. That's one thing. When we get into, and a lot of this, I do have PMA projects for one MRO customer of ours. And those sorts of things, it just depends on, if it's a PMA project, for example, you have to be able to have your supply chain kind of lined out, and those people have the appropriate credentials for all of that stuff. So when I speak to, especially during the headwaters of a PMA project, those sorts of things sort of get lined out already. And the good news is that the customer that I'm referring to is actually they work very closely with us. So we're kind of like all on the same page as far as like our supply chain is concerned to begin with. My approved suppliers are their approved suppliers. So we work together very synergistically on that front.
Okay.
So those sorts of things, yes, do pop up from time to time. It's just it's not as prevalent as some other types of routings that we go through.
Okay, amazing. So that's it for today, Aaron. Do you have any last-minute closing thoughts or advice for our listeners?
If you're choosing to do an AS9100 system, just go through it. Take the hit. We went for a really long time without one. So I would encourage whoever chooses to be in the aerospace business, do yourself a favor. Just start with an AS certification. It'll be a lot simpler for you.
Okay, amazing. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, if you don't have those systems and processes connected from your day one, the way Aaron had, obviously it's going to be very difficult. And sometimes you might feel discouraged that, so it's costing us so much, it's taking so much time, and then you might not choose to do AS. So first, figure out your process, be AS compliant before you become the AS certified. On that note, Aaron, I really want to thank you for your time. This was a powerful episode.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate your time as well.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Aaron, head over to tntaerospace.com. It's tntaerospace.com. They are a credentialed manufacturing supplier with a wealth of experience and knowledge within the defense and aerospace sectors. You can also email Aaron at aaron@tntaerospace.com. That is AARON at tntaerospace.com or call 360-988-0274. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Angela Furman, who discusses the process for supplier capacity and quality planning. Also, the interview with Mark Evans, who discusses the manufacturing and engineering processes of a Boeing supplier. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.